Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're digging into where good ideas really come from, based on some incredible work by Steven Johnson. And fair warning, we're about to bust a myth that pretty much all of us grew up with.
You know the story I'm talking about. The lone genius, right? Working away all by themselves until, bam, a flash of inspiration, a light bulb flicks on, and the world is changed forever. It's a great story. We all love it. But is it actually true? Well, as we're about to find out, it's usually not the whole picture. Not even close. All right, so let's put this whole lone genius myth under the microscope. And our perfect test case? Willis Carrier. Yep, the guy who invented modern air conditioning, way back in 1902. I mean, on the surface, his story seems to fit the bill perfectly, right?
So the legend goes something like this. Carrier's standing on a foggy train platform, and suddenly it hits him, this amazing idea about using mist to control humidity. And from that one single moment, this world-changing invention is born. An invention that literally redrew the map of America and, yeah, made him a very, very rich man. It's a clean, simple story. So, what's the problem? Well, it turns out there's this really weird paradox hiding in plain sight, and it messes up this whole neat little narrative.
Okay, so this is where that simple story starts to, well, fall apart. And it all begins with something really strange, something counterintuitive, about the very cities we live in.
Okay, just look at this contrast. It's wild. In nature, there's this universal law, right? It's called Kleiber's Law. And basically, it says that as living things get bigger, their metabolism slows down. It makes sense, you know? An elephant's heart beats way slower than a mouse's. But cities are the weird ones. A physicist named Geoffrey West found they do the exact opposite. The bigger a city gets, the faster everything moves. They get more innovative, more creative. They're literally breaking the laws of biology.
And we're not talking about a small effect here. The scale is it's staggering. The data actually shows that if you take the average person in a big city, say 5 million people, they are nearly 3 times more creative than someone in a small town of 100,000. And when we say creative, we're talking about real metrics like patents, new businesses, that kind of thing. So get this, it's not just that there are more people having ideas. The people themselves are becoming more innovative. How crazy is that?
So, this is the big question, isn't it? If the whole lone genius thing is a myth, and it's actually the city itself making us more creative, then what's the secret sauce? What's going on in our cities that sparks all this innovation?
Well, the answer really boils down to 2 incredibly powerful ideas. And once you understand them, this whole paradox about cities, it starts to make sense. It gives us a totally new way of looking at where good ideas come from.
Okay, first up is this concept called the adjacent possible. Now, I know it sounds a little academic, but the idea is actually super simple. It just means that big breakthroughs don't come out of nowhere. They're always built from the pieces, the ideas and the technologies that are already lying around. So innovation isn't about creating something from nothing. It's more about combining the ingredients you already have in a new way.
Let me give you a really powerful example of this in action. Let's start with a huge problem. A modern, high-tech infant incubator. I mean, these things can cost upwards of $40,000. They're super complex. Now imagine you're in a rural clinic in a developing country. When one of these machines breaks down, and they break down all the time, what happens? It just becomes an expensive, useless box. There's no one around to fix it.
Okay, now, let's think about the adjacent possible in that exact same village. What parts are lying around? Well, car parts. You might not be able to find a specialized medical technician, but I bet you can find a mechanic who knows their way around an old car.
And that's what led to this, the NeoNurture Incubator. It's a life-saving device built almost entirely out of old car parts. Think about it. The warmth comes from a headlight. The air is circulated by a dashboard fan. And the alarm, if something goes wrong, it's a door chime. This is a perfect, beautiful example of an amazing innovation built entirely from what was already there, from the adjacent possible.
But here's the thing. Just having the spare parts isn't quite enough. You also need an environment where ideas about those parts can, well, bump into each other. You need a place where half-baked ideas, or hunches, can connect with other hunches. And that is what we call a liquid network. Cities are the ultimate liquid network. So is the internet. They're places designed for these little sparks of ideas to collide and become something bigger.
So what happens when these networks fail? The consequences can be, well, truly devastating. Let's take a look at a tragic example. Go back with me to the summer of 2001. There's an FBI agent in Arizona, Ken Williams, and he gets a hunch. He notices this really disturbing pattern. A bunch of men with known extremist ties are all signing up for flight school in his area.
It was a critical piece of information, but it was only one piece of the puzzle.
Meanwhile, just a month later and hundreds of miles away in Minneapolis, another team of agents gets their own hunch. They're looking at a suspicious student, a guy named Zacharias Musawi, and they get so concerned that they actually wrote a memo worrying that he might be training to fly something into the World Trade Center. This was it. This was the other half of the idea.
But those two hunches never connected. The information from Arizona and the information from Minneapolis never met. They were trapped in these separate, rigid silos inside the FBI system. It was the complete opposite of a liquid network. The individual ideas were there, the hunches existed, but the system itself failed to connect the dots. And we all know the catastrophic result of that failure.
So, okay, the takeaway here is huge. If we know that good ideas need these liquid networks to form, the obvious next question is, how do we build them? How can we intentionally create environments, our own coral reefs, so to speak, that are designed specifically to help these important connections happen?
Here's one really useful way to visualize this. It's a 4-quadrant map of innovation. And it's pretty simple. On one axis, you've got whether an idea is market-driven or not, is someone trying to make a profit. And on the other axis, you have whether it was created by an individual or a small team versus a large open network. And our old friend Willis Carrier, the supposed lone genius, he sits right there in quadrant 1.
But here's where it gets really interesting. When you actually start plotting out the biggest, most important innovations from the past few hundred years, you see something amazing. Quadrant 1, the lone genius box, is practically empty. It's the least common source of innovation. So where do most big ideas come from? Overwhelmingly, they come from Quadrant 4, from open, collaborative, non-market-driven networks. Think about the creation of the internet, or GPS, or mapping the human genome. These weren't born in corporate labs for profit. They came from universities and shared research communities.
Thomas Jefferson had a beautiful way of putting this. He said that an idea is like the flame of a candle. When you use your candle to light another, you get more light, but your own flame isn't diminished at all. And that's the core principle here. We're always better off when we connect ideas, not when we try to protect them and lock them away. And that really brings us to the final question, the one for you to think about. Charles Darwin used this wonderful phrase, the tangled bank, to describe the beautiful, chaotic, interconnected life in a coral reef. And that's really what innovation is about. So the question is, how can you build more of these tangled banks in your own world? How can you create more spaces that are a little more open, a little more connected, maybe even a little more messy, to allow for those amazing new ideas to grow?